So we
we'll
are up early. We are up early, and women are here in gallons, Henry.
Good,
I'm hearing what Sanele is saying. Remember, I'm advocate for women. So whilst we are talking about Sanele policies and all, me, as a woman and having a crowd of women that want to access opportunities, Sanele, the question is, what does that mean now in terms of the processes, tender processes? Because we were told we have a 40% to play around with. Now, you're saying you are busy with policies, and unfortunately, Sanele, today I'm going to go on the other side because I want us to be very clear about what we are saying about the consideration of designated groups. Now, I'm asking this, Sanele, from two angles. Remember that as part of the auditing of annual reports, there's BEE compliance as led by DTIC. So that's why I'm asking, there are also charters that talk about the representation, and you have organs of state like your ESCOMs, your ESCOMs, your telecoms, all these arms that have their procurement processes. What does this discussion that we have today about the preferential procurement policy, including women, what does it do to us being considered for these tenders as we speak, Sanele? And that's why we are here today, Sanele and Henry, to get clarity so that we know what is it that we are doing. Because you have the charters and they have put DTI, we have put requirements. This side, we are still talking about policies. So what do we do as women?
So Nandipa, I'm going to hand over to Sean now. So we've got a little bit of just a few slides that Sean's going to lay out. And then after that, we're going to basically get into maybe a little bit more discussion. So yeah, it was just kind of getting an update from Sanele on where he's sitting with the policy, but we hear you, and we'll get into that now soon. Okay.
Okay. Powerful.
Right.
Powerful.
Over to Sean.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you very much, Henry, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Advocate. Nice to hear the perspectives. We're going to start the dialogue because this is important, and we're heading into Women's Month, August. So we thought let's start to get this discussion going and see if we could possibly bring this to a head in the next couple of months. So let's quickly go through. I'm just going to quickly do a recap on the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, the Constitution, Section 2.1 of the Triple PFA. We'll go through the Concord ruling and the National Treasury Circular, and then just recap Regulation 4, which is in the current 2017 regulations. And then we've got some options. We do not have a solution. We've been thinking through options. It would be presumptuous of us to say this is the solution, but we think there's certainly some real issues to be thinking through here. Let's just quickly then go through. I'm not quite in the order of the points that I've just raised, but the first one is the circular that National Treasury put out 2 or 3 weeks ago, which basically concluded that organs of state should, by the 27th of January, ensure that procurement policies in line with the Concord's judgment of 16 February are in place. New preferential procurement regulations are promulgated when these regulations take effect. So we've really got until the 27th of January to be sure that we've got preferential procurement policies that are going to work. And as Sanele had mentioned earlier, there's lots of expectations around this. And very nice to hear Advocate talking as an advocate of empowering women in this process. The Constitution, 217 of the Constitution. 2171 clearly says when an organ of state in the national, provincial, or local sphere of government contracts for goods or services, it must do so in accordance with a system which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, cost effective. Now, I'm repeating that. Many of us in public procurement are very familiar with this statement. And we note when we contract for goods or services, the system must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, cost effective. I'm going to read 2172 again, just to be sure that we are listening carefully and we're reading carefully what it says. When subsection 1 does not prevent the organ of state from implementing a procurement policy providing for subsection 1, that subsection that talks about fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, cost effective, does not prevent the organ of state from implementing a procurement policy providing for, listen carefully, categories of preference in the allocation of contracts and the protection or advancement of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. The subsection 2 is very, very powerful. Subsection 1 does not prevent the organ of state from having a procurement policy that provides for categories of preference in the allocation of contracts. That's powerful. National legislation must prescribe the framework within which the policy referred to in subsection 2 must be implemented. What is that national legislation? It is the PPPFA, the Act of 2000. And in the Act of 2000, the Concord judgment makes reference on many occasions to 2.1 of the Act. And 2.1 of the Act says very clearly, an organ of state must determine its preferential procurement policy and implement it within the following framework. And then it goes through that framework, talking about the 90-10, the 80-20, and the formula that would use then to prorata the scores given the 90-10 or 80-20 system that we use. Very, very importantly, and we've probably missed this for 22 years, and we're starkly reminded of this when the Concord gave its judgment in the 16th. An organ of state must determine its preferential procurement policy and implement it in the following framework. Just a quick one. Yes, we are expecting regulations to come out, and certainly a draft set of regulations have been issued. At most, those will prescribe the threshold between 90-10 and 80-20 and the formula. It's going to be a very brave National Treasury that puts out a regulation that is more than that, because the Concord has said very clearly, it is neither necessary nor expedient for the Minister of Finance to issue the regulations. So this is it. All we're going to get is that threshold between 90-10 and 80-20 and the formula. Just to remind us that there is an important definition at the beginning of the Act that talks about an acceptable tender. It means any tender which in all respects complies with the specifications and conditions of tender as set out in the tender document. That 2.1 framework then goes on beyond the 90-10 and 80-20 and talks about specific goals. Let me just briefly go back. The 10 points may be allocated for specific goals as contemplated in paragraph D. We'll have a look at those. Those specific goals are not very prescriptive. The specific goals may include contracting with persons or categories of persons historically disadvantaged by unfair discrimination, on the basis of race, gender, or disability. It may include implementing the programs of the RDP program. E is very specific. Any specific goal for which a point may be awarded must be clearly specified in the invitation to submit a tender. So we're talking here about the 10 and the 20 points. What specific goals will be used to determine whether the bidder scores 20 points or 18 points or 16 points or 0? And those points must be, those goals must be clearly specified in the invitation to tender. Furthermore, if you go and look at 2.2, it says any goals contemplated in E must be measurable, quantifiable, and monitored for compliance. Measurable, quantifiable, and monitored for compliance. One of the advantages of the BBBE scorecard is that it is certainly measurable, quantifiable, and monitored for compliance. There is a system behind that scorecard that helps to meet that particular requirement of the Act. To go back, 9th of August 2020, President Ramaphosa said that we will do this, among other things, by setting aside 40% of public procurement for women-owned businesses. We now expect national departments to monitor and report on how many women have participated in each public procurement process. They will have to develop clear plans on how they will broaden women's participation over the next 12 months. Last year, the Minister of the Presidency reiterated this call, brought the private sector into this as well, and restated the importance of that goal. The Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017 has in it Regulation 4. This was the regulation that the Supreme Court of Appeal made a call on. We'll discuss that shortly. But this particular qualification criteria in the 2017 regulations is very limited in the context of what we've just described as being that 40% goal. If an organ of state decides to apply pre-qualifying criteria to advance certain designated groups, that organ of state must advertise the tender with a specific tendering condition that only one or more of the following tenderers may respond. A tenderer having a stipulated BBBE level, an EME or QSC, and then it talks about a tenderer subcontracting a minimum of 30% to, and then it lists the different designated groups. Before I go to that, this is quite limiting. You could say BBBE level 1 or 2 or 3, you can describe that level. You can say, or you can say you have to be an EME, or you could do both. You can say BBBE level 1 and 2, 1 or 2, and you must be an EME. And then you can also bring in the subcontracting component. A tenderer subcontracting a minimum of 30% to. And then it lists those designated groups. And in the designated groups there we see, and we'll just stick then to this topic of today, which is women, an EME or QSE, which is at least 51% owned by Black people who are women. Now, this does not allow currently, the pre-qualification criteria does not allow currently pre-qualification of a tender for women. It allows pre-qualification of a tender to subcontract 30% to women, in this case, Black women. And that's the limiting factor. Many in public procurement have said that although the state president has given that directive, the mechanisms that are open to those in public procurement are quite limiting in order to do that. So in summary then, let's bring this to a head. The organ of state must determine a preferential procurement policy, which may include, amongst other things, gender. What are those options then for including women in the organ of state's preferential procurement policy? Now, I'm going to run through these, and I'm not going to judge them at this point. I'm just going to put them down as a mechanistic option to include women in the preferential procurement policy. And the first option is, as an other means in terms of Treasury Regulation 16A and Instruction 3 that we had early this year. Putting that down as an option. So some of us might prefer to use the word a deviation. So we would deviate and we would go directly to a woman-owned business and negotiate with them the deal. So that's the one mechanism that we have. The other mechanism that we have is that we put this in as a condition of tender for an acceptable tender. The other one is we use the pre-qualification criteria that we've currently got in regulations 4 and 9, very similar, and we describe it as a pre-qualification criteria. I'm not judging this now, I'm just putting these down as the options. 4 is we include women somehow as part of the specific goals points, as part of the 10 or part of the 20. So this then would ensure that we have some mechanism in place to prefer, if we've got multiple tenders, to prefer then through this point scoring mechanism that we've got a women-owned business. And the fifth option is possibly as on an objective criteria 2.1F. Let me briefly run through some of the considerations on each of these, and then we can open this up for discussion. As an other means, an example might be that the organ of state describes, as per the requirements of Instruction 3, the circumstances that they would use this deviation. And they would say, for example, where there are 3 or more Black women-owned businesses that compete for the goods or services or works, where there are 3 or more, we might then go directly to those 3 or more Black women-owned businesses and negotiate with them and deviate. We don't go out on an open competitive tender, we go directly to them. Firstly, this would need to be included in the SEN policy of the organ of state. I've got a question mark as to whether this should be included in the preferential procurement policy, but let's say for the purposes of this discussion that it possibly should be. The question, however, then is this included? Is this catered for in the framework? And another question I'm asking then is it actually necessary to be catered for in the framework? First option. Second option. As a condition of tender, and I'm using this deliberately to try and distinguish this between pre-qualification criteria and a condition of tender. And so you would openly advertise the tender, but you target or set aside this particular tender for women-owned businesses as a condition of tender. A question I'm asking, given that set aside is now used and included in the draft public procurement policy, can organs of state now use it? Despite that old practice note that's out there that says that you may not use set aside or benchmarking. Those who've been around for some time will recall that old practice note that talks about set asides and benchmarking. Given that National Treasury have put out a document already, a draft public procurement policy, but not policy draft public procurement bill, can we now use that? Will this be challenged though on the basis of the Equity Act? Question. Is this too close, however, to the pre-qualification regulations that we've got in the 2017 regulations? Just putting that as something to consider. Could we also option number 3, just take what we've had previously on the regulation 4 and we use it. And instead of just having triple B service level contributor, we actually say the tenderer having a percentage of Black woman ownership or women ownership. The consideration here is the Supreme Court of Appeals said in its 2 November 2020 ruling that regulations 4 and 9 are unlawful. So that would certainly be a consideration if you were to use pre-qualification criteria in a similar manner to how it's used in the 2017. Or option 4, then we actually build in a point scoring mechanism. For example, one option might be, and this is what the preferential procurement policies might say, women-owned businesses score 20 points. Possibly we have a scale, depending on the woman ownership or the percentage ownership of the business, there might be a scale that would go from 100% woman-owned, you score 20, and then we could move it from that point down. Or there might be an option, which is very close to what we had in 2001, where we take a portion of those points and we say this portion of the points is reserved for women-owned businesses. So for example, we'll say 12 points go to other specific goals, 8 points would be women-owned businesses. Some of the questions there, the one is this double counting? If we were to use, for example, triple BEE as part of the other 12 points, would there be some challenge on the basis of double counting, because we've already got women-owned businesses in the triple BEE scorecard? But hey, it gives us a way to provide a greater emphasis. Or should we rather, because there is already this triple BEE scorecard system that we have, just revert to what we had in the 2001 regulations? Use that as a starting point and improve from there. And then finally, option 5 is as an objective criteria. And this is an example. There's a lot of misunderstanding on this particular one, but basically you would say something along the lines of, if the total score between the bidders is less than 5 points or 2 points or 3 points, the organ of state may award the contract to number 2 should their women ownership be higher. Something along those lines. If that is then used, what will be important is that women ownership should then not be part of the selection criteria nor the award criteria. It would be something that is used right at the end of the process. I don't have answers. Henry and I have had some discussions on this and thought we would put these to you as a starting point of this discussion in terms of what can be used and what should be used. I'm going to open up the discussion then to those that have joined us and see if there are any perspectives and inputs on what we've just gone through now. Any points? Advocate, let's see if we've got some other comments first before you came in. We'd love to hear from you. Hi, Richard, welcome. Let me just quickly check that. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Sean, and good morning, colleagues. Sean, I think you brought a very touching subject, especially like you said, we are going into the Women's Month. And again, there's a problem here in terms of, the SONAs. If you look at how the Jacob Zuma SONA, which then resulted into the 2017 regs, it brought a certain dynamic that Treasury then, followed it by legislation. And I'm not going to discuss whether that legislation at this point it's enough, but there was a trail of thought, from the 2011 regulations, looking at the policy of BEE. BEE has not achieved what was expected of it. and all those other things. And we then went into a process to develop the National Treasury 2015 document, which then became the actual 2017 regs as we were building up that process. So yeah, I think the subject matter is good, but if you look at the trail of thought, I mean, if you look at from 2001 regulations, you know, public sector clients have the latitude. So meaning that we were following the exact framework which was in the Act, because we were allowed as public sector now within those limitation of 10 points or 20 points to allocate points for disability, for women and all those other things. And that was taken away when the 2011 regulations brought in the BEE, which
Exactly.
that was a big mess up. And if you look at why you know the BEE legislation was not challenged, is because you know the established sector. I don't want to become racist now, but it's a racist issue if you look at it.
We have to talk it.
So
Yeah.
the established sector, which probably dominated by white race.
Absolutely.
Therefore, then they didn't challenge the BEE legislation because they could still work around the BEE's legislation because it was fair for them, you know, in terms of the elements that are in the BEE. So you don't have to have a level 1 in terms of qualifying on all elements of those BEE. So you could actually become a level 1 easy, even if the company is predominantly white owned. So that's basically what was it. And then it moved to the 2017 regs. And we agreed with National Treasury before to say that those regs will not pass the test of time in terms of constitution. We knew already, but powers that may be at that point, they forced that regulation to go on. And that is why even National Treasury in the Cyril Ramaphosa SONA did not follow up the 40% with legislation.
Yeah.
Because of the very same you know, problems that we're experiencing now. So for me, in answering your question 1, the other means of you know, regulation 16A6 with instruction note number 3. In the construction industry, we could have easily worked out that process, because what we have done there is that by using that very same regulation, we can then set up, because the regulation is very clear. It says if you have predominantly a certain sector of predominated by whatever goal that you want to achieve, whether it's women owned or whether it's cooperatives, whether it's whatever, you can define your sectors. So for us, we said, okay, to achieve your 40% that the Cyril Ramaphosa wants, is to basically use that instruction note 3 with regulation 16A 6 to look at how then you set aside budget. Now, you don't set aside projects, you set aside a budget. And that budget, then you will have a business case where you will say, this program is for women. And therefore that 40% of procurement is now locked into that program for women. And women entities can then, you know, participate only as women and compete as women-owned businesses in that procurement process within that 40% of budget. And the rest of the budget then is open for all businesses or for everyone. So that's how we can work around that one. If you look at your number 2, where it says condition of tender, you know, if you look at the conditions of tender, because that it hits the public market, you have to observe certain, you know, clauses within the Constitution itself and also within the procurement legislation, especially in the Constitution. If you look at the Bill of Rights and all those other things, they are bringing some elements which you might find wanting if you now put women-owned businesses as your target, to say, I'm targeting women-owned businesses. Why then do you have to put it on for the world to see? if you are targeting women, why couldn't you then have a database of women and advertise it within that database? So there are a lot of questions around how you can work around that. In terms of bringing in pre-qualification criteria as per Regulation 4, one has to be careful how you introduce it in your policy there. You must be very careful because already that has already been, and remember, pre-qualification was also in terms of what you have put in your scope. Your scope already determines is the pre-qualifier itself. If in the construction industry, by mere saying a grade 7, you already have pre-qualified. You understand? So you have to be careful how you introduce certain things into your pre-qualification advert. But to look at as a condition of tender, it's going to be difficult, but as a condition of contract is easily achievable because that you are in control. And those are your conditions attached to that contract. So you will be able to look at that. In terms of the set-asides, I know that National Treasury would not agree in terms of set-aside, but if you then do the program that I discussed, a women program or a youth empowerment program, all those programs linked to a certain budget, it's already a set-aside of a budget. Therefore, you won't be found wanting in that area. Yeah, that's my comments there. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Good one. I mean, just picking up on your set-aside point, though. Your National Treasury have put out a document, and they've included in that document set-aside. Why would they now be difficult to and so we can't use set-aside?
Yes. If you look,
I mean, you've seen it in Chapter 4 of the Draft Public Procurement Bill. It's there.
Yes. If you look at what is in the procurement bill, they are now favoring set-asides because the bill itself is repealing the framework. Remember, the whole point here in terms of achieving our specific goals and our NDP goals linked to the section that you've mentioned in the triple PFA, the categories of persons or contracts. That is limiting us in terms of that framework of the 90-10. The 90-10 and 80-20 principle is the one that actually hampers transformation to achieve our specific goals. And therefore, and we are locked in there. Even if you introduce an objective criteria, that objective criteria still has to be aligned within either the 10 points or the 20 points, nothing more. So you are locked and you cannot actually achieve anything. And that's where the problem was. And National Treasury, in resolving this, instead of amending the triple PFA Act itself, then they are solving the problem by issuing regulations, which they are now found wanting on. So yes, Chapter 4 of the new bill includes set-asides which can work, and it even sectorizes them. So it gives the latitude to the departments and municipalities or whoever as clients to now in your policy define your sectors, look at your mandate as a department and define those sectors to have different programs and align it to your procurement system. That's all they are asking for to do there.
Good one. You. Thanks, Richard. We'll go to FK and then we'll go to Sonele. Hi, FK. Welcome.
Thank you, Sean. I think Richard has said a mouthful and partly captured the essence of what I wanted to say. Starting from the 2015 SONA that was presented by the former President Jacob Zuma. In that SONA, the statement was on set-aside. And instead, National Treasury translated not a set-aside, but 30% subcontracting. And 30% subcontracting being for contracts above 30 million. And if you look at subcontracting for contracts above 30 million, SMMEs don't play in that space at all. I normally say that for SMMEs, they get a 1 million tender, they celebrate that they've got a 1 million tender, they go and slaughter a cow. So in terms of transformation, subcontracting was not addressing the political intent of 30% set aside. And Richard puts it precisely to say the 30% set aside is not per project or per contract, but the statement was 30% of the government department spend on goods and services. So it is aligned to a financial constraint or a financial figure to say it has to be within 30% of the budget. So now when you look at PPR 2017, it did not address the issues of set aside. Instead, it brought in the issues of pre-qualification and the subcontracting that I've addressed. So the president now, the current president now, then addresses a political intent of 40% spent on women companies. And that has not been translated into a prescript from National Treasury. Last year, we received a questionnaire from the Department of Women, I think it's Women Affairs, where they were asking us, how are we performing in terms of the 40% spent on women companies? And in one of the responses that we gave is that this has not been reduced to an instruction from National Treasury, and therefore it is difficult for us to apply it. We cannot apply it. Maybe if we're applying it, it can be within the prescripts of the regulations 2017. That is how we responded to that, because we're still awaiting guidelines in terms of how we are going to implement the 40% for women. And now that has been superseded by the Constitutional Court judgment. And the pre-qualification is now in question. And if you look at pre-qualification, it says the organ of state may decide. In other words, it's optional. And that puts one in a bit of a dilemma that in view of the Constitutional Court judgment and the upholding of the suspension of the invalidity of the regulations, what do you do in terms of applying pre-qualification, which you already know that it is a subject of contestation? So in my view, the way forward will be looking at what you are going to incorporate in your preferential procurement policy as provided for in Section 217 and the Preferential Procurement Framework Act. Then if you describe it there in your, or if you incorporate it in your policy, then you are applying it in your policy as provided for by the higher level prescripts that I've mentioned. So that will equally talk to the specific goals that you are targeting, because we know that Black women, and not only Black women, women were disadvantaged in the past, but now the focus is Black women. So there is a high risk that there is still going to be a challenge as to why only Black women, because all women were previously disadvantaged.
Vakila, just explain, how do you see it being put in the policy? I mean, that an organ of state will say, you know, here is a budget, here are certain tenders and quotations, and we are going to reserve these, or we're going to use these to target women-owned businesses. How do you see it, you know, being described in the policy, in the preferential procurement policy?
Okay, in my view, Sean, I think firstly it is going to be about the organ of state understanding their commodities and understanding their market.
Sure.
And where you are very certain that you have a significant number of women playing in that space, then you include it as a category of designation in your preferential policy, and you justify as to why you are going to put it in. And I think for us to have preferential procurement policies that are not going to be under heavy scrutiny is to determine our key stakeholders and have extensive engagement with our key stakeholders to say, what is your input towards our preferential procurement policy? If you have done and if you get an output that is informed by stakeholder views, I don't think that you'll go wrong.
Thanks, Fikile. Good one. Good one. Let's go to Sonele first. I do see Verleen's hand there, but Sonele did have his hand up. Hi, Sonele, go ahead.
Yeah,
We're still looking forward to seeing your document, but you want some time to first get it past your stakeholders. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would have liked to. You remember that I was the one actually who proposed that I wanted to put it in, but now that there are these red tapes, these bureaucratic approvals that you need to consider, you just have to fold sometimes. But I'm happy because my colleague Richard is here, and he has said quite a lot, which is actually what most of us feel. There's a document which I think was part of its development, the CIDP contracted participation goals, which ended up as a draft. That document was one of the deliberate efforts to address what actually organs of state wanted to address in the infrastructure procurement, because we were able to say what the contractor needs to do on site instead of giving the community a service provider together with a subcontractor from other region or other province, and not even considering what actually the demographic that needs to be empowered on site. So that document, I believe that it is going to be a good initiative in dealing with the women empowerment, because the way it was crafted, you could be able, you were able to say, for these contracts, this is what we need. This is how the CPG should look like in terms of the percentages. But the thing is, with us in South Africa, we are always chasing. We are always chasing, and we are not proactive. I'm not sure whether the current leaders have so much on their plates that they get to forget some other stuff. But the thing is that we do not have proactive leaders. They have to be protest first before there would be something. Before, some time ago, we were talking about youth empowerment, 40% youth, and no one came back and said, look, now we have achieved the youth part. We are moving to 40% women now. And maybe because my colleague actually covered this statement to say, sometimes these political statements only end up being political statement.
Yeah.
And understanding our environment in supply chain and procurement, you can't just implement political statement or newspaper articles as part of your processes. You need those to be reduced into norms and standards and guide you going forward. So this 40% for women, it's a good initiative, but where is it in black and white? Where is it where it is given to the organs of states to practice that? So it is quite difficult. Sometimes you will see accounting officers as people who are defying the instructions from politicians or from national government, but there's nothing in writing to say this is what you are doing now. So I so wish that we can at least get this level of being proactive. Right now, because it's going to be August, we will be talking a lot of this 40%. Just after August, we'll forget about this and continue with other stuff. So on this document that I've created, obviously we considered what you were presenting initially, Sean, that there are so much red tapes. So we were working on trying to achieve this 20 or 10% or 10 points. There's, would say at least a company which is owned by women, it has to get 100% non-negotiable in order to achieve the 20 point or 10 point. So we will not say you'll get 12 or deduct any point. It will just be 20% full. So it's 100% of the 20 points. And even the subcontracting part, if you want to put that subcontracting as one of the goals to gain those preferential points, at least if you subcontract a 100% women-owned company, you'd be able to get those points. So that we're trying to be deliberate, as much as it is just a fraction of what we wish to do. But working on the current available legislation, you can try to be deliberate to say it's non-negotiable. We'll stick to 100% women-owned companies for these kinds of empowerment, you know. But yeah, in the current form, and it's even worse now because there's so much confusion. Obviously, a few months down the line, 2017 regulations will be out. We'll use the draft. Okay, probably the draft will be passed, and few months down the line, this draft will be gone. It will be replaced by the procurement bill, and that bill also, there's so much around it. So we just don't know. You can't even put long-term planning strategies on how to empower women. You just have to push from A to B in a temporary manner. So by the time where you can try to put in some initiatives like contractor development program like CDP, next thing you'll be putting those CDP programs based on the current legislation. Next thing, this legislation is gone. What do you do? So those are the dynamics which women may find it difficult to actually benefit from the current economy of government. Yeah, thanks, Sean.
So Sanele, you're tending towards using the points as that preference mechanism, and it sounds like you're going to try and keep it as simple as possible, and just say if you're 100% women-owned, you get 20 points, and if not, you score 0.
Yes, what the view was is that obviously there has been quite a lot of inconsistencies in terms of applying the local production and content in itself. And there has been quite a lot of inconsistencies to even calculate the preference point. So we are trying to make an easy approach.
Something simple.
Yes, so that they can be able to just say, okay, it's 20 point or it's not 20 point. Rather than creating these formulas, which will in the end create some irregularities. Sure.
Good one. Good one. Thanks, Sanele. Evelyn, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Sean. Good morning, everyone. I just would like to say that I am a woman-owned bus company, and your subcontractor for PATCO, I'm mentioning their name so that it is the realistic situation. I was subcontracting for 9 years. The 30% and the 70% split on the tender was awarded. I come in as a subcontractor. Now, what you have is the main contractor gets the full monies from government on the subsidy, and they don't pay me the 30%. So you can imagine, how do I subcontract for 9 years, which was my argument and fight until today, to what my company is now destroyed? I don't have any. Is the fact that when we put the policies and we want to empower women, and you put a contract that comply to showing there's your woman, there's the documents, she's got the buses, she's all ready to go, because now we bring her into the main scheme of empowerment, actually became a disempowerment to me, to lose everything. And even though I brought it to the departments, I had the department, national, provincial, and I had my consultant to show that I was running on a 35% loss. Now you ask yourself, this policy and framework, for what it meant and to what it should have done, had I received the 30% as to what government had to see that I get it, there was no one to see that. And so when you fight on your own for what isn't happening, then at the end of the day, you get to become the victim and being victimized. So when we start putting these frameworks, then we must take it from real case studies, real issues. We sometimes put these policies together, and then it's with the intent of what it will do and secure. And then you ask yourself, if I would go to take the whole process to court, who's going to come to my defense and who will even take on the case? Because it becomes something that there is so much red tape, as my colleague have said earlier, and to who you're fighting, it's the Goliath towards the David situation. But of course, how are we going to change that? And I need to speak up so that we don't fall in the same situation to what we continue doing the same thing. Now we've increased from 30 to 40, but 30 didn't even work. Thank you.
So, Verleen, thank you for that contribution. So you were involved as a subcontractor to a primary, the prime contractor had the deal. You were subcontracting to them.
Yes.
That was the situation. So if you like, it complied with what the regulation said, but for the subcontractor, it didn't work out.
Yes, I wasn't paid the subsidy section or the 30% that was supposed to be the split of what I came in as a woman-owned bus company.
In a subcontractor manner. And that's one issue, and we know of many other issues where that 30% is also becoming very impractical to work, and the challenges it's causing in the construction sector and elsewhere. So thanks for the, appreciate that.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Sean. I think, yes, I can support Verleen in that understanding, you know.
Yeah.
We also find out, because we were monitoring in terms of, you know, since 2017, how our clients actually executing the 30% subcontracting as defined in the Act. And I liked the idea that the lady spoken before, FK, to say that, you know, the Treasury missed the whole point in terms of the 30%, and they actually limited it to a project value instead of a budget. And then that's what caused this kind of problems. I mean, if you look at how it's crafted in the 2017 regulations, it says 30% of the contract value, the value of the contract, and which we recently even pick it up as a client for actually misaligning this very same regulations, because what they've done, they award a contract that is more than 78 million rands, and 30% of that should be subcontracted to a subcontractor. And they have evoked it in their advert to say that that will be a condition to a contract. And what happens is the main contractor opens up his own procurement system within a procurement system. And now he goes on a competitive process. And if you look at the competitive process, it should not be in terms of pricing, but it should be in terms of capability and capacity. That's it. So what he did is then he opened competition and subcontractors competed, and therefore a subcontractor that was awarded that contract is awarded around 12 million or 15 million, which is way below the 30% that should have been subcontracted. And if you look at the areas of where the subcontractor was engaged, it's where the main contractor actually priced his items in the bill at the lowest price units and rates. So in effect, you are saying, as I pick it up, you are saying you want to develop this contractor, but you're already killing him in terms of you, as pick it up, not complying to the very same act. The provision, it says 30% of the contract value. So that contractor, whether it got a R1 billion project, 30% of R1 billion in value must be subcontracted in terms of these current regulations before anything else. And that's what we have found. Pick it up and the main contractor wanting on that, and they were both charged. And yeah, we subsequently closed the case recently. Thank you, Chair.
Good one, Richard. Are you concluding, Richard, that the subcontracting element in this preference system is just really not working?
Yeah, it works if you are an intelligent client and you know how to manage subcontracting and the conditions of subcontracting. Remember, there's especially in the construction industry, we work with 4 different contracts that the CIDB has developed. Now, in those clauses, and if your subcontractor or your development of that subcontractor does not understand the clauses, then the main contractor abuses the subcontractor in terms of the payment clauses, in terms of other, risk, health and safety issues. And then at the end of the day, that subcontractor is actually getting no profit at all within the project. And what is the role of that? So we always constantly, trying to capacitate public sector clients around how to understand your JBCC, how to understand your NEC contract, your FIDIC, and your GCC, because of we have seen that most of our public sector clients, especially in the contract management section, your project managers in public sector don't even understand the very same contracts themselves. Now, how do you manage the main contractor if you are a project manager who does not even understand the conditions of the contract? So that becomes a serious capacity issue in government. Thank you, Chair.
Good one, Richard. Thank you. Thank you. FK?
Thank you, Sean. I would like to go beyond the scope of what we are discussing now. To say we can have state organs developing their preferential procurement policies. We can have policies on procurement by other means. We can have the procurement bill. But for as long as procurement does not have the space that it deserves in strategic management, we will never win the battle, because it starts from the budgeting and planning instruments. If you look at the guidelines for developing your strategic plans, your APPs, the procurement plan does not even feature. There is no talk about how should you plan for implementing these prescripts that seek to transform our economy or that seek to address economic transformation. It's not there. If you can't plan for it, you can't measure it, and how are you going to report it? And for us to achieve this, one is looking forward to an intergovernmental relationship where you will have DPSA, who is the custodian of the APP, the planning instruments and the reporting instruments, National Treasury, the Department of Small Business and Small Business Development, and DTI, maybe to a certain extent DPE, all coming together to say, how do we incorporate this in our strategic planning and reporting instruments, so that at the end of the day, we can measure how the state entities are applying these prescripts. What difference is it making to the society? I've always argued on local content and local production. That was the point for us putting local content and local production in bid documents when we can't actually measure the difference that it is making. Do we have a database now that can tell us that as a result of local production and local content, these are the number of manufacturing companies that have since been established? Where do we measure that? So we can come up with all these nice policies, but if procurement does not have the right space in strategic level, then we are missing the point. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Good one. Good one. Thanks, Vicky there. Any other comments? Advocate, you started off right up front. Advocate Nsaluba, talking
Thank
about.
you.
Go ahead,
Thank you.
Advocate.
Thank you, Sean, and I must commend Richard, Fikile, and Sanele for the engagement. I think Fikile has just said the heart of it, that for as long as we don't look at procurement as a support plan, a non-negotiable in terms of strategic planning, we're missing it. A clearer example to bring the information home, Sean, last week we were talking about a matter about the directorship, right? And we're talking about how can that be monitored? And we're talking about transversalization of systems, and that is located within SITA. Now, when you talk about cross-cutting matters, you then need to ensure then that DPME, that is the custodian of strategic plans, is enabled to have a procurement plan for the country. If we still don't have an ICT plan for the country, I'm not sure how we are going to have the procurement plan. Yes, Treasury is doing what they are doing, really, but it's not linked with the strat plan, unfortunately. Like Fikile is saying, that the clear guidelines of the linkages of all support plans to the master strategic plan, and all APPs then to the master APP. So if we have not mastered the strategic planning and foresight planning, we're still going to have this. But coming closer to what Richard was saying, you know, I think the construction, DPW, and my experience on how they've begun to look at 40%, like Richard is saying, for me, it begs the question is as follows. If construction is doing what they are doing, what is happening within mining? What is happening within energy? What is happening within transport? So what I'm begging for is a cross-sectoral approach into these SONA-based pronouncements. I'm still going to go to the pronouncements themselves and how they come to be. Because then there's an organ of state that should be, and I believe it's DPME, that should be dissecting these pronouncements, and through their budget votes, they are monitored in terms of how then they are implementing them. Because if these, and I'm talking about then the stakeholder responding to the SONA, and then in the process, you look at whether the law allows for that. It cannot be a knee-jerk after the pronouncement. Surely, given the planning cycle of government, you don't have a pronouncement in the SONA coming from osmosis. It's something that in terms of the planning cycle, it happens around July, around this time. And so those determinations of whether the law allows us are the things that should be happening. So for me, it is the triangulation that government has. And I think last week, our colleague put it nicely, that the legal unit should be a friend of strategy. Because every time you are working on something, we must look at the legalities of it, including the SONA. But I want them to go to your, including the SONA pronouncements, because you might find that some of the pronouncement needs to be enabled in terms of legislation for them to take effect. And that then needs to be considered as some of the risks that are linked to all the pronouncements. Surely someone in government should be tasked to be dealing with that if we want to ensure that there is service. I want then to talk to your summary of your 5-pronged strategy. In terms of the Treasury Regulation 16 and then the Instruction 03, I think Richard has said a mouthful regarding utilizing that particular regulation to lift this 40% that was a policy pronouncement.
Yeah.
They didn't have a legislative platform. I think you and Richard have already said that currently the draft bill is beginning to pick all the things that were supposed to have been done, because ideally what was supposed to have been done was to have conducted the evaluation by DPME of the implementation of the policy. And it would have then shown some of the things that are flowing now from the regulations. And then the draft bill be an instrument that deals with those, even prior your orders that you had to comply with. So I'm saying we might be creative to use Treasury Regulation 16 with the instruction. And I must say, remember my first question I asked, I'm saying a lot of people that are here today are women, and they are in various industries. The question that must be answered is, whilst we are still speaking English here, what is Anglo-American doing with Regulation 4 and Regulation 9? And what is Anglo-American process of procurement considering in terms of the promotion of women? And I want to put it further and say the promotion of military veterans, because that's another indicator that had to be argued that it must be put into the picture, which became part of your qualifying criteria. And the question now is, with all that we are doing, what are the transformation imperatives that we are compromising? Acceptable tender. I want to differ a little with Richard and say, if one goes to the Constitution and you go to equality, there's what is called fair discrimination, and you don't hide that. You make it up front. Fair discrimination is allowed. That's why you have girls' schools and boys' schools. And in constitutional law, we indicate how then you are able to argue that the principles of fairness and that discrimination is fair discrimination. And as such, I find it difficult that we're saying we cannot locate this as part of an acceptable tender, because we need to make sure that these transformation imperatives are considered. And being upfront about them in terms of that particular tender, I don't see why that would be a problem, because you are dealing with fair discrimination, which is constitutionally allowed in terms of Section 9 of the Bill of Rights. The pre-qualification criteria, yes, Sean, last week when we were dissecting the current audit findings that link to the determination by the Competition Commission, I think we began to see the challenge with the regulations. And someone at some point said, it's not about the people who cooked the food is wrong. After last week and the sections that we're dealing with, it was clear that the food is not right. So whoever cooked the food will still be problematic, because those regulations there's the sacrosanctity of them is very questionable.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing that they've been declared actually unhelpful, so that we are able to do the right thing. But the unfortunate thing then is that the pre-qualification criteria, which are Regulation 4 and 9, we're addressing exactly what I'm here for today, the issue of women. And that's a sad reality, which then takes us to what then should be the critical role that's being played by some of us, including yourself, Sean. Sean, you to like me. I like harping on something that I feel is always left out. The discussion we are having is still, for me, problematic because it's without my friends who have developed the scorecards. My friends who have developed now the BEE part of the annual report. Because those are the very same people who they are system owners. And they are the ones who should be driving this process as system owners. Now I'm talking about DTIC.
Sure.
And this discussion without them is problematic. Because like I started earlier, if regulation 4 and 9 cannot be utilized in terms of procurement, remember, we're not talking about procurement in government, we're talking about procurement across South Africa. It then means then there is a mismatch between the BEE codes and scorecards and what is in reality happening in the procurement space. Someone must deal with this. And if we cannot fail, Sean, to address it during this month of opportunities that must be there for Pan-African women in Africa, and again fail in August. The 2 months are critical for us to sort this out.
Yeah.
And I thank you that you decided that we start on the Pan-African Women's Month, which is this month. But I'm then saying, Sean, there must be a way of pulling DTIC into this debate. Because we can't make SANELE to move progressively that side. And the people that are supposed to make a determination on equivalence are not made to have a say in the matter. Because at the end, when we're dealing with the draft bill, their input in any case will be needed. But here now, we need an intervention that should enable us to consider transformation imperatives at organ of state level. And they are the ones who are having the codes of good practice that they are implementing. So I'm saying, I'm really begging that at some point you must get them smiling to come and deal with this matter during the same month of Pan-African celebration. Point 4. There was a mention that we want to shove this women matter in the 10 and 20. I have a challenge, Sean, because in as much as it's good intentions, but the question is, X will be doing that in let's say in ICT, whilst in energy something else is happening. So I'm calling for what I would say a real dialogue, rigorous dialogue on these issues, and because they affect women and they affect designated groups. Because now we are taking from Paul to pay Peter. Because remember, you have the whole set of designated groups. Now, because it's us, you want to play around with this 12 for us. What about the people who are disabled in this whole thing? What about military veterans in this? Because there's a military veteran who is a woman. So don't tell me it's WDP. That person sacrificed her youth to be a military veteran. She remains a woman. So WDP should not be a problem. Because the democracy that you have is because of the sacrifices of that woman. Objective criteria. Last week, we were talking about what is objective in the first place before we even talk about them being objective. What determines objectivity? So Sean, my take around this matter, it's bigger than, and I want to thank you for lifting it up. And I also want to say the sad reality is that out there, people are being told about the 40%, right? And the reality is that this 40% is not playing. There's a 30% of subcontracting, and I'm happy that our colleague indicated that this 30% is also not doing what it's intended to do. So we need a social contract at presidential level and a rigorous debate like we had on fees must fall, okay, which actually is at a higher level, at governmental level, at organs of state level, led by the minister that is dealing with the women and designated groups, so that this matter is dealt with in a manner that will service the transformation imperatives. And I'm saying with all humility, it's not about only women. It's also about disabled people. It's also about military veterans. So it would be helpful that this matter is dealt with in a very comprehensive manner at a level where it's problematized, because it is a problem. But I want to close off then by saying, what we said last week, strategy must befriend legal. Procurement must befriend legal. The question is, there are RFQs that are out there. What are we saying now is the process? And is that process followed through by all organs of state across all sectors? What I see in construction, which I know from DPW, is it the same thing that I would see in energy? Is it the same thing that I would see in ICT? Is it the same thing that I would see in mining? Is it the same thing that I would see in agriculture? Definitely not. But why not? Signing out. Thanks, Sean.
Good one. Thank you, Advocate. Good. Fikile, did you want to raise something else, or was that still an old hand?
It's not a legacy hand, Sean. I'm afraid that this will end up being a mentor and mentee engagement. I am a product of Advocate Ntaluba, by the way. A question to her, Sean. I think one of the things that is affecting us is a stovepipe approach.
Just say that again, a what approach?
A stovepipe.
Stovepipe approach.
Yes, like a stovepipe, you know, that chimney, a chimney approach, that each stove has its own chimney. In everything that we are talking about, and when we start addressing the BE aspects in terms of how they fit into the 40% that we are talking about, in terms of us looking at drafting the procurement policies and probably factoring in the 40% for women, what is the relationship between the procurement policies that we are expected to develop and the sector codes? Because there are some industries that now have a sector code that clearly stipulates the transformation imperatives. How do the two relate, and how should we treat them going forward? Because we talk as if the sector codes are not existing, unless if I'm missing something. Thank you very much.
Sean, through you.
Go ahead, that's good.
Fikile, I'm humbled, deeply humbled, but it's true. But I'm proud of you and many others that are on this platform. Look, this is exactly what I was saying, Fikile, and that is why I'm begging Sean that we must get the sector code boffins to actually come and talk to these issues. NEDLEC should be given a platform to actually reflect on this, because you know the sector codes are the instrument to actually they are the instrument that is used to measure the extent to which we are actually through procurement doing the right thing. So we can't have sector codes this side through DITC, and then you have procurement this side. If you remember, at some point I said there was supposed to be a one-stop shop once upon a time. And the absence of that once upon a time, one-stop shop is the one we're suffering from now. Because there is a relinquishing that was supposed to have happened and the acceptance that was supposed to have happened, but that has not happened. But then, it being the case you then need to pool the players. You know, that racy analysis, who must be informed, who is accountable, and all those who is responsible. We need to pool the responsible people. And I say this when we're dealing with the court ruling, because in my vision, I saw the transversal invisibility of their participation affecting us right through. So exactly what Fikile is saying is the reason why I'm really appealing that proper Fikile, Sean needs to be assisted in terms of raising these matters, for example, as PDSC and at EXCOS, so that the accounting officers themselves take it upon themselves to lift this to their CEMs, if in education, into their ministers' engagements, and then it finds itself in the clusters. It finds itself as an agenda point in the clusters. It gets discussed in all the clusters, especially the economic and social cluster, so that this becomes a serious agenda. So my take is the participants in the group who are in government really now have got enough muscle to say, as procurement, there's a problem, there's a strategic issue that must be lifted as a guideline for the accounting officer, who must lift it to the minister, who must lift it to the cluster, and that being a cluster matter, it must land with the president. It will force everybody to focus on it. That's my recommendation.
Very good. Very good. Thank you everybody for your comments, sincerely. And this is complex, and we've been spending some time with different departments and public entities around the country, and they have this requirement to develop the preferential procurement policy by the 26th of January. The challenge of this is it is complex, and just looking at one of the provinces we've been in, where locality is extremely important. To bring locality or location into this system and deal with all these other dimensions, these other specific goals, is going to be really, really tough over the next while. So this discussion must continue. We will continue it. Thank you for the suggestions on who we should be bringing in to this to continue it. We'll take that sincerely at heart, and we'll continue the process. So all the best, everybody. We'll certainly let you know what we've got scheduled for next week. I have got a couple of requests that we put out, and we'll keep this discussion going. Thank you very much again. We'll try and get this onto the YouTube channel. And very, very valuable. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sean. Bye.
Thank you, Sean. Long
Thank
live.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Thank
Yes,
Thank you.
Sanela, thank you.
Thank you, Sonele.
Thank you, thank you all
everybody.
for interesting dialogue and debate.
Excuse me, Sean, before we go.
Yes, hello, girls. Go ahead.
What is the name of the YouTube channel where this is going to be posted?
It's public procurement and SCM collaboration. Let me just quickly see it. It is in our email. Let me see if I can quickly just show it to you.
It is in the email.
In the email.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just subscribe to that one, and it will come through. All right. If
Okay.
you do a little search on public procurement collaboration, it will come up on YouTube. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Sean.
Good one.
Sean,
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Sean.
Thank you, Advocate.
have you considered having
Thank
a
you,
chat
Sean.
with DG DPME on this matters?
No.
Think about it.
Good one.
We'll talk on the side. DG
Good.
DPME and DG Presidency on those matters.
Yeah.
Because those two people, unfortunately, are the
Critical.
ones that have got to assist the president in making sure that we do the right things and we make sure that the 20-day payment, the 30-day payment of SMMEs and provision of opportunities happens. Because remember, Sean, what we're discussing here now is affecting one of the important indicators that are there in the strategy of PTYSA. It talks about the increasing the participation of SMMEs. And not only increasing the participation, making sure that they are paid within 30 days.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you have? Sure. We can continue this offline. Absolutely.
Yes, let's continue.
Thank you. Appreciate that suggestion, and we'll pick it up. Absolutely.
No, thanks, Sean. Keep well. Keep up
Good
the
one.
good work. We're proud of you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much. Thank you.
Good one.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Good one. Thank you. I did see Adele. Thank you.
Hi, Sean, I'm looking at the email. I can't see the YouTube
Thank you, Hannah.
link.
Let's let me just quickly. So I'm just going to share it with you now, and then you'll be able to see it.
Okay.
But you know what I will do? I will quickly go in. I'll be able to find your email address, and I'll send you the link on the email.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so
Would that
much.
help? Very good.
Thanks.
There it is. I'm showing it to you now, so that does help. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Good
Sean.
one. Thank you.
Sean, I just wanted to, Sean, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Henry. Hi.
When we're offline, I'll just give you a quick call.
Good one. Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Ciao, ciao.